Hi, I'm Priscilla Pipo with Balanced Culture Consulting. I'm going to talk to you again about conflict, and this will be the final installment on this very important and complex subject. We as leaders need to have in our toolbox the ability to manage conflict effectively. One thing about conflict is that we're dealing with people, and people are complex. We're dealing with ourselves. We need to understand ourselves and we need to understand them in a way that helps deepen a relationship and helps us deal with conflict on a day-to-day basis and manage it in the moment. So, to self-reflection, conflict is formed in us at a very early age, and how we will react to conflict is based largely in part on the first team we were ever a part of, our family. In my family, conflict was kind of a way of life. I was raised by parents who weren't really big fans of each other, and so there was a lot of fighting, a lot of conflict. So my reaction was, get out of it. Avoid conflict at all costs. Get as far away from it as I can. And yet, conflict found me when I wasn't looking for it, and I had to learn how to handle conflict and how to manage it. I learned that I couldn't avoid it because it was going to be there anyway. But understanding that about myself helps me to know how I manage conflict and how that affects the teams that I'm on now. The team approach with conflict, as we talked about before, is you're setting the tone for culture when you as a leader are managing conflict. You want to be aware of how other people are handling conflict and how you might be triggering conflict in them. Now, this never occurred to me. I always have the best intentions and assume everybody knows that. In one place I worked, when I was working with other directors and other managers on a leadership team, senior team, and I was introducing an initiative that was for all of the people in the leadership team to understand. So we would embrace it and we would adopt it for the rest of the organization. So it was a meeting where I was getting a lot of input and a lot of people giving pushback, and there was conflict, which I didn't really handle as well as I could have. And one person who I considered a friend was on the front row, and he was starting to say something, and I said, hang on a second, because there was somebody behind him I thought had his hand up first or needed to say something, and I hang on a second. And so we continued the discussion and we finished it. And I went to my buddy's office afterwards and I said, hey, how did you think that went? When I presented it, it seemed kind of rough. And he said, well, did you notice that I shut down and quit talking? I said, no, you're a pretty quiet guy. So he said, when you put your hand out and said, hang on a second, that was a trigger for me. I don't do well with that phrase, and I shut down. I was no longer going to participate. That was the first time that I understood the effect that I can have on other people that I had no idea I was doing. So I began to understand the importance of having trusted people I could talk to give me feedback. In fact, he and I actually attended at an engineering conference a session on managing conflict, and I learned more about that. It was hugely important for me. So one thing about conflict is that there is a part of our brains that's the neurons in them. In fact, it's called the mirror neuron, causes us to mirror or mimic whoever is in front of us. It's probably an adaptable thing that happened to help us survive. What it means is that when we're in conflict, what our first reaction usually is to match the conflict. We become defensive, we become no, I'm not, and we want to make our point. But it's not effective. What it's doing is causing the other person to escalate even more. So we want to learn how to dial that back and how to diffuse conflict when we're in the middle of it in the moment. Another quick story. When somebody came into my office one time who was really angry at me, something that I didn't think it was a problem, it's nothing that I had done intentionally, but she was so angry in the moment, she could hardly even talk. And she was a senior team member, as I was, and thought that I had undermined her authority, and she was just almost in tears. I didn't know what to do other than at that moment just to go over and hug her. Now, that hug won't work in all situations, but at the moment, it was important that I convey to her, I had no ill will, and I wanted to diffuse this conflict and be productive, and I wanted her to know that I cared about her. Well, we can convey that in other ways other than hugs. And one way we can do that is by listening and trying to truly understand the other person and their perspective. When we try to understand what's going on with them, we've understood ourselves, but we need to understand the other person. What have we done that might have caused them to feel conflict? And then we need to acknowledge our part in it. As my grandmother taught us, it takes two to argue. And whether I want to be right or not is not the important thing, so much as it is the other person won't be able to hear me until they have diffused their conflict and they're able to listen with all of their brain and they're not under the attack of the amygdala, which is the fight or flight syndrome that derails our ability to access that prefrontal cortex where rational thought occurs. Happens in all of us. But understand that we can contribute to that in others just as we can contribute it to in ourselves, and they can. We have the ability to control how we react when we become more aware. Alishka and I have developed 5 steps for dealing with conflict in the moment with other people. And we'd love to share it with you if we have it on our Facebook page, and we will address it in the wizard class that we'll teach in January. But we want to be able to make this available to you. 5 steps for managing conflict. And if you're interested in it, contact us. Connect with us on LinkedIn. Find us on our website at balancecultureconsulting.com. And let us know how we can help you as a leader to manage conflict more effectively. I'm Priscilla Pipo with Balanced Culture Consulting. Thank you for joining me.